Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Winston Churchill said, "Continuous effort, not strength or intelligence, is the key to unlocking our potential." Well, on today's episode, we're going to talk about the daily choices the best of the best make to reach their full potential, building confidence, developing the right mindset for leadership, creating a culture of success, and more. My guest is a husband and a proud dog dad. He's a leadership performance coach, author, keynote speaker, and host of the top-rated podcast, Compete Every Day. He works with companies and leaders around the world to create a competitive advantage in their cultures and careers. Over 80,000 leaders to date have been impacted by his coaching and expertise. His list of clients includes Deloitte, the Dallas Cowboys, National Breast Cancer Foundation, Titleist Golf, FootJoy, and many others. Please welcome the founder and chief encouragement officer at Compete Every Day and the man who understands that success is a byproduct of the choices we make and the person we decide to become, Jake Thompson. Jake, it is great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
You bet, Jay. I tell you what, I need to start bringing you with me to events because the voice, the introduction, it's so strong. I feel like man, I need Jay right before I walk on stage to get me ready really to go. So thanks for having me today.
It is my pleasure, and I am so excited about our conversation. So let's dive right in. I thought a good starting point for us, Jake, would be for you to share with all of us what your favorite thing is about yourself and why.
Oh, that's a good thing. I think my favorite thing is I am naturally optimistic, and I credit my mom, my dad for kind of pouring that into me until it stuck. But I think the fact that I have that optimistic attitude allows me to really embrace that chief encouragement officer role that I so dearly love, because it's all about the power of our perspective, how we see our situation, how we see our opportunities as well as obstacles. And that really determines, no different than the quote you mentioned at the very beginning, our ability to play the long game, to persevere and stick with it long enough to succeed.
Oh gosh, I love that. So let's talk about that optimism a bit more and the influences from mom and dad. So mom, teacher, dad owned a gas station.
Yep.
So give us a bit more context. So what was it? What were the lessons that you learned from both of them around optimism, around having the right type of outlook? So explain that in a bit more detail for us.
For sure. So I grew up in a tiny town of about 13,000 people deep in the heart of East Texas, about 2 hours east of Dallas. My dad had a small gas station that he owned in our town, and my mom was an elementary school teacher. And so for me growing up, the fact that my mom was a teacher, my dad's mom was a teacher, and I came from a little bit of a family of entrepreneurs. And I say that because my mom's dad was a cotton farmer in West Texas. And so my mom and her brother grew up working the fields, cotton fields outside of outside of Lubbock, Texas. My dad's dad was a contractor, and his wife was a school teacher as well. And so there was a combination of you just figure it out. Like that was kind of the mentality of when you struggle, you have to figure this out, and you have the ability to figure out if you stick with it. And one of the lessons I really remember of in terms of your ability to stick with itness and that belief in self, which is where a lot of the optimism for me comes from, of I don't control the situation. I'm going to have hard challenges. It's not ignoring the reality, but it's also accepting the reality and saying what's still in my control to improve the situation. And for me, it was, I always go back to baseball. My dad's a huge baseball fan. So from a young age, I was playing t-ball and coach pitch. and I got hit in the face with a baseball, like first grade. A guy threw it over to me at first base. I was playing catch with someone else, and so get drilled in the face right before the game. Front teeth, I lose a tooth. I'm bleeding all over my jersey. I clean up, I play the game, which I feel like really cool as a first grader because I'm like, I got blood on my jersey. But immediately after the game, I start becoming afraid of the ball. I just mentally, I go from never missing a pitch in coach pitch or machine to now I can't even stand in the batter's box because I'm afraid of getting hit. And I come up with this idea that, I just don't like baseball anymore. I want to quit. And my dad's like, you're not quitting. And I was like, no, I just don't like it. I want to do other stuff. He's like, you finish the season. If you start something, you finish it. And he said, if you're having problems, like, we'll figure it out. You have the ability to figure it out. He knew what was going on. He knew I was scared of getting hit by the ball, but he's like, you have to face those fears and figure that thing out instead of running from something that scares you or something you want to avoid. And I finished the season, and I played a handful of years later in baseball before I eventually kind of went to the second religion of Texas in football and was all in there. But it was one of those lessons that really stood out of there's always going to be things in life that challenge you that you're not going to be very good at the beginning. But if you focus, if you work hard at it, you can improve that situation. You may never become a pro baseball player, but can you overcome that challenge? Can you improve the spot you're in? And so that really stuck with me. And when you pair that with my mom, who's a teacher, who's heavy, that growth mindset pouring into you, like, you're smart enough to figure this out, keep working through it, that really stuck with me. And as I was laughing earlier this morning with somebody, really played into kind of launching my career, because when I got out of grad school, I left what I thought was my dream job, and I couldn't get a job. It was the recession. It was a tough time. I was overqualified for entry level. I was underqualified for management. And I just kind of had to figure it out again and start over and figure out how we're going to make this work. And so that whole piece has really been a part of my journey. And my wife laughs and other people I come across of like, how do you stay so optimistic? And I'm like, because the alternative is just to be a victim to the circumstances, and that life determines what's going to happen versus what's still my say in the situation and how do I take ownership of it, and then how do I change it for the better.
Yeah, what a great mindset. Thank you, Mom and Dad, by the way, right, for instilling those great lessons in you at a young age. And, I'd love to talk then, because you have that optimistic way about yourself, and that seems to be ingrained in who you are. And I'm of course, I'm sure it's also something that you continue to work on, right, as you continue to navigate
every
life,
day.
Right? Every day, right? That's something that we always have to continue to do. So have you found that there is a dark side, if you will, to being maybe too optimistic, too positive, maybe Pollyannish? Has that ever entered your sphere of consciousness? And if it has, how have you addressed that, or how has that impacted you, perhaps?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things to that I love pointing on. So the idea of the positive side, right? The reason I chose optimism as my word over positivity is because I think a lot of times with positivity, we dismiss reality, right? We think the building's on fire, we're in the middle of the building, but we're naturally going to be fine. That's not positivity in the slightest. That's a big trouble spot, right? So what we have to do is accept the reality of the situation. Sometimes reality sucks, right? You go bankrupt, your business venture fails, you get a cancer, like that all is there, but you still have control in that situation. And so it's understanding that. Where my optimism will get me into trouble, especially as a business owner sometime, is I will bet on myself to a fault sometimes, right? Because I believe I have the ability to figure it out. Whatever the situation is, I'm going to figure it out. And that did get me into trouble early on in my business because I took on debt building the products-based business that we started as. And then I found myself of, oh my gosh, how do we get out of this? And it was the same attitude that got me out of this of like, here's how we're going to do it. Here's where we're going to focus. But it was also the attitude that got me into it. And so sometimes that optimism, if not reined in, will allow you to make bigger bets on yourself than you probably should. And it's interesting. There's a couple of books. One, Top Dog by Ashley Merriman and Poe Bronson, that talks about the science of winning and losing and how men versus women handle competition. Big groups, individual, small groups. And the other book, Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke, talk both about how men traditionally overbelieve their capabilities. And so we're going to bet on ourselves, even when the odds are heavily, heavily stacked against us. Where traditionally women are going to make sure there's a better chance of them succeeding before they place those bets. And so that's where optimism gets me into trouble as well. But at the same time, what I would say is no risk, no reward. And if I hadn't believed in myself enough to take those bets, I wouldn't be doing the work I get to do today.
Yeah, I love that. So we have a great audience of both men and women. So for all the men out there, can you relate to that story? I know I certainly can. And I love it that, women tend to be a bit more thoughtful in their approach, right? They think through things and they really give it a bit more time and attention and energy before acting on something. I love that logical side. So thank you for sharing both of those two resources that obviously have had an impact on your life. So speaking of that particular challenge that you faced early on in your business career, let's share maybe a memorable or a profound experience that you've had in your life, and it could be that particular one that really has shaped your philosophy on life.
Yeah, so I'll set this up. There was a lunch I had maybe 18 months into starting Compete Every Day. And we started as an apparel business. I was selling shirts out of the trunk of my car as this side hustle that started to grow. And it was incredibly slow and painful at the beginning because I had no idea what I was doing. No idea about e-commerce, products, any of that. I was just like, here's an idea, let's try it. And a friend took me out to lunch, and I'm probably 12, 18 months into business, and he says, how's it going? And I was like, dude, this sucks. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing. This is really hard. Do you know how many t-shirts you have to sell to make a living? Like, way more than I thought coming in. And he laughed and said, well, you are your own worst accountability partner because your brand is no matter what happens, you compete every day. If you're in a bad spot, you show up and compete. If you want to change your life, you show up and compete. If you want to see what you're capable of, you compete. And the reality is you can change the business, you can change what you do, services, all that, but you're stuck living, breathing, preaching this message till the day you die because people have bought into it. Whether there's 10 of us, 100 of us, dude, one day I hope it's 10 million, but people believe in it. And the moment you quit is the moment you tell everybody what I told you was a lie. And you know better and I know better. And I remember when he told me that conversation, it was kind of like a, haha, yeah, I can never quit this. And flash forward into about year 3 going on year 4, I've taken on a ton of debt trying to grow the business. I got distracted trying to build us and make us look bigger. I was trying to inflate my ego and how big we looked versus how much better we got. And I left an event in California. I was driving to Las Vegas through the desert on a Sunday night. And for anybody that's ever made that drive, Sunday night, like headlights are coming at you as everybody's going back home to California. And there's just darkness in front of you in the desert. And as I'm driving, I'm like, man, I lost $10,000 to $15,000 I can't afford to lose. I'm not the guy to build a business. Maybe I don't have the entrepreneur bug or gene that my dad and grandfather had. Maybe I'm just not qualified. Maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe every reason to quit. And I'm thinking about how do I get out of this? Do I go back to consulting? How do I liquidate the inventory? And somewhere in that drive, I got hit with that conversation. And it just kept replaying in my head until eventually the narrative shifted from how do I get out of this to how do I get better? I'd gotten away from this idea of how do we just get better every day, believing in this mission, communicating this mission, and try to be like everybody else who was bigger because of what I saw online or what I thought they were doing. And that whole shift really changed the business. It changed the rest of our business that year. It planted seeds that had massive impact. But when I shifted into the role of now really speaking and working as a leadership performance coach, it's really planted the seeds more than anything else because it got me out of the comparison lane. It got me to really focus on how do I help people get better and not worry what everybody else is doing, not try to be like everybody else, but simply say, hey, who's doing well that I can learn from? And how do I make me better? And that one piece has impacted all of the decisions we've made in the business going forward and truly what I believe has helped us to where we are today.
Wow. What an amazing experience to have and such an incredible shift to occur in your own story, right? Again, speaking to that language and the narrative that you were telling yourself, it kind of reminds me of the story you shared when you got hit by that baseball and you made a decision that you weren't going to play anymore. And that was a story that you were telling yourself, right? And through the work you did, through your dad's encouragement, you were able to change that storyline. And I bring that up because, and I'm so glad you shared it, because imagine, and you run into this in the work that you do, I run into it in the work that I do. Those narratives that we tell ourselves have such a dramatic impact on how we show up to the world, the work we do, the amount of effort we put in, and it has such a ripple effect. And when we are aware of it, and that really is the key, that self-awareness, or when someone else is able to hold a mirror up to us and show us this is what's happening based on what you're telling yourself, it's not until we have the awareness that we can actually do something about it. And for you to have that shift like that and change it, and then how that impacted the rest of your career up to this point really is phenomenal. And those are great stories, and I hear those time and time again. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
You said something there I wanted to pull out real quick, if you don't mind. You talked about those stories, right? So I had a coaching call yesterday with a client, successful entrepreneur. He gives tons of presentations. Well, he's having to speak to his kids' lacrosse team at their athletic banquet. And he's like, I can't do it. I don't speak well in public. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, I didn't give a best man speech for one of my buddies at his wedding. I don't speak in public in group settings. And so like, I'm terrified of tomorrow night. I said, but you give presentations and sales pitch all the time. He's like, yeah, it's different. I was like, no. Let's pull at this story. I said, it's the same thing. What's the difference? He's like, I can't speak in front of people. I said, no, that's the story. I said, the reality is when you do work, you're prepared. You've written the presentation, you've done the work, you know it inside and out. So when you give it, like, you know what you're going to say. When you're trying to speak in front of people, you're trying to pull it out of your pocket. And the worst time to think of something to say is when you have to say it. I said, if you want to change the narrative, you just have to change the process of preparation and start stacking evidence to the contrary. And so we put a plan together of how he was going to do the presentation tonight for the lacrosse team. And then afterwards, I said, you need to go make notes and say, this is what I did. This is how well it went. This is what resonated. So you have something to pull out later when that story, that negative story starts to come back that you can start rewriting. And so to your point, yeah, the stories we tell ourselves dramatically impact how we show up.
Oh, that is so very true. So pull the timeline forward a bit. So take us from the time that, you're selling the T-shirts out the back of your car. You had this change in narrative. What ends up happening with that business? Because ultimately you still sell apparel, but you also pivot and move in other directions to add value to other people's lives. So just carry that storyline for us.
So the business really started to grow 14, 15, 16. 2016 was our best-selling year we'd ever had. We did events all over the U.S. But at the same time, I had just gotten married. I'd gotten married in late 2015. And my wife works in real estate on the title side. So she works Monday through Friday. She's off Friday night to Sunday night. Well, when you're working expos and events, you're gone Thursday to Friday until Sunday to Monday. And early on, I realized this can't work long term. And at the same time, I'm little by little paying this debt down. But every time you go sell $20,000, $30,000 worth of apparel, you come back and you spend almost that same amount to replenish what sells well, so you keep inventory moving. And I said, there's got to be a better way to go back to my core message, which is help people be intentional and compete with themselves. How do they get better results by competing with themselves? And I just happened to be at Social Media Marketing World in 2016. And I wandered into a breakout session that Michael Port of Heroic Public Speaking was offering. And Michael, I had to read his book, Book Yourself Solid, in grad school, like 2008. So I knew his name, and I sit and watch this session. And I'm fascinated that I didn't know what I didn't know. Because in my head, you're a speaker. At the time, I was like, you're a Tony Robbins, you're a Gary Vee. Like, you're not just like a guy. Like, you got to be some famous celebrity. And I'm watching Michael coach speakers and thought, that's really interesting. And so I invested to go to his conference, which at the time was probably the biggest investment I'd made for a ticket to an event. And as I'm getting on the plane to go to that event from Vegas, I was taking a red eye. a customer that had been a customer of my apparel for 5 years emails me and says, "Hey, would you be willing to keynote our state PR conference?" And I thought, oh, cool. Well, I'm going to this conference. I'm going to learn how to speak, and I'm going to go do this event. And when I got to the conference, I remember looking around the room and seeing recognizable faces in there taking notes. And I thought, this is legit. And as I learned more about the craft, I thought, this is what I want to do. And so I invested to learn in their program. And while I was going through that very transformational process of understanding it, I thought, this is how I can help people. Like, I can encourage people with a shirt, but I can help change their lives if I can teach them. And that's really where I saw it. And so I started shifting our business pretty quickly in 2017 and 18. And the funny part was, at first, it was the worst decision I thought I'd ever made. As I pulled all of my attention and focus and energies from growing the brand and the apparel to how do you build this speaking business, our sales went off the cliff. And I went through a period of 2018 that I say was probably my most depressed I'd ever been through. Relationally, my wife and I were struggling. We were kind of that for early year marriage of like, we don't really know each other, going through that. The sales in our business dropped. I went 2 to 3 months without taking a paycheck to make sure my team got paid so that I could at least get them through this. And it came to a day that literally I had an Amex bill I couldn't pay. They were calling. I kept trying to figure out how to get around it, and just kind of had a breakdown at the kitchen table. It was literally the birthday. I say it was like the 7-year birthday of our brand. And I was like, we're not going to make it. And I'm crying at the kitchen table, which I never do. And my wife walks in and she goes, "Oh my God, do you have cancer?" And I was like, "What?" And she goes, "Wow. I've never seen you cry." And like, only when our dog died. So like, my first thought is, "Oh my God, you got a cancer diagnosis." And I was like, "No, I can't pay this bill." And she laughs and she goes, "Oh, like my previous life, I had situations like that. You'll be fine. Like if I trust anybody to figure it out, it's you." And I remember her telling me that. And I remember about 2 weeks later having to let some of our contractors go that I'd worked with for a couple of years. And one of the guys told me, I even saved the email. He sent me as a follow-up, as a reminder. He said, "This is going to be an incredible part of your story if you don't quit." And I was like, okay, like I believe this was the decision to move our company this direction, and I'm gonna find a way to make it work. And we did. In 2018, we weathered the storm, and then 2019, the seeds that I'd been planting for a couple of years start to harvest, and the speaking business starts to grow. In 2020, it doubles. And even when COVID hit, we paid back a ton of events. I thought we were gonna crater, but everybody was at home shopping. So the apparel sales took off. And at the same time, speaking started to take off. And then in 21, it grew. In 22, we tripled the business. And then we grew again. And it just started to snowball effect that way. But what I found was, like, in the middle of that storm of that 2018, it was the best training ground for all the leadership, the psychology, sports psychology, professional and personal development that I'd been doing for years of like, here's what I'm trying to teach people. As we know, you learn at a whole other level when you're going through it, having to live it and teach it. And that's what that 2018 really taught me, and was that pivotal piece for us.
What an incredible story, and it's so relatable. And I know those that are watching and listening right now, I know that this message is landing with you, because there are plenty of people that have gone through similar experiences, very difficult times. You almost you lose your belief in yourself. Whatever it happens to be, there could be a pile of debt sitting there for you, and you're just not sure, how am I going to make it to that next hour? How am I going to put that next meal on my table? How am I going to get through the night and to tomorrow? And it's amazing that the right message, the right people, here in your case, your wife comes in, right? She sees you in this very difficult situation, and she says one thing to you that just completely reframes the situation, right? She's thinking it's the worst case scenario, cancer, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, you've got a bill you can't pay? We can get through that, right? I mean, I love that. It's so simple, but it's so powerful at the same time. So speak to then the relationship with your wife. So you guys went through a tough spot there, right? Which I'm sure other people can relate to, especially when you're building a business. You've got two people that are in the marriage that are both working real hard, trying to figure their place out in life, and also building a relatively new relationship, right? So what did the two of you do to work together to build a stronger relationship. What was that process like for you? And just kind of speak to that briefly.
Yeah, so it's funny. In our second year of marriage, we had gone through a bumpy spot and had started seeing a counselor. We're not even on the same page. And my best friend had reached out to him. He lives in Ohio, and I was like, man, you've been doing this for a decade. I'm in year 2. Like, what the heck? And he goes, well, my wife and I, we still go to counseling. And I was like, what? He was like, yeah, we go like a couple times a year. He said, we treat it like you would a doctor. You just go for a checkup. But he said, for us, it helps eliminate issues before they ever get to that point. And I was like, oh, like I'd always thought like you only go to counseling right when you're getting ready to divorce. And he was like, no. Like if you care about the relationship, you invest in it. He said, it's no different than investing in a business coach to help you grow and develop. You make the investments in what matter. And when he had told me that, like that was one of the things that we did. We kept in our budget of like, we still need to go, even if it's once a month or once every couple of months, we still need to go see Lisa. And then when Lisa moved, we set a schedule and saw Layla. And so that was a big piece of it. The other piece was she had, and this was a really funny one that a lot of our business owners can relate to, right? She had a very traditional 9-to-5. Her parents came from a very traditional 9-to-5 background. I come from the entrepreneur side. Like my dad, one of his old secretaries embezzled a couple $100,000 away. Like he's dealt with all sorts of stuff, right? And so I've seen it, but I've always seen my dad have the same thing. Like you figure it out. Like you deal with the problems, you figure it out. And so for me, that's always been my attitude. And so when we were going through this time, it was really an interesting process from learning from a relational perspective, because she always saw herself as the safe out income. Hey, it's consistent, it's whatever. And over this process, as she saw me go through the storm and then really where we've gotten to, she got a new understanding, and our counselor helped and everything else of like, I had the safer decision. Because at the end of the day, you could lose your job tomorrow and there's no backup plan. You've got a 401k, you have some stuff saved, but if I lose an opportunity or a sale tomorrow, I'm just going to figure out what else to go do because that's what I've had to do. And I have that mentality of like, hey, we have this. And so us better understanding what her fears were about my work and me understanding where she was coming from and communicating really helped us kind of where we are now as I've continued to grow and where we've made sacrifices, because we haven't been fortunate enough to have kiddos. We have dogs. I've got my 3 right here at the foot of me. And so we love to travel. Now you would think like I do every week. I'm on the road. I'm in an airport, but she loves to travel. So when we're off work, like we'll go 2 to 3 times a year on vacations. And her friends are like, why do you do that? I was like, well, that's our time to recharge, to get away for the 2 of us. I was like, I use credit card points. I said, I travel all the time. So like, I know kind of where to go, what to do. And that's kind of our time so that it's a work hard when we're home and then we get away. And so we went through that process of learning. We went through the process of counseling, and seeing someone and getting help is not just do it when it's bad, but really taught us the importance of working through that communication and investment. No different, right? It does you no good to go to the gym once you get sick. You go before so that you stay healthier. And so we had to start treating our relationship that way. And the last piece was kind of us understanding, she'd been through a marriage situation before. I had never been in a serious relationship at all. And we met and were married in 13 months. And so we had to work through the process of learning to communicate. And I started to understand more about that and how I communicate with my team by working with her. Because just because it's in my head and it's clear as day to me does not mean it's clear as day to who I'm talking to. And so I went through and learned that process as well.
That's such a powerful story. And first, I want to thank you for sharing that with all of us. And I'm so glad that you tied it into the impact that it's had on relationships and relationship building beyond what happens in your home. And I think that's so important. And there's so many lessons that come out of what you just shared. And it reminds me of the book, the 5 Love Languages. Yep. And, I remember prior to reading that book, I had no idea why I wasn't communicating effectively in my marriage. And I'm still working on it, right? But the things that I thought were important to my wife were really the things that were important to me. And I wasn't even connected. We weren't even on the same page there. Nope. And I think about applying those love languages to business as well, because we have to understand how the people around us receive information, how they like to communicate, what's important to them. And if we're not asking those questions, if we're not really digging to find that out and really exploring and having those important conversations, then our ability to communicate goes down dramatically, and we lose people because of it. We aren't able to effectively to manage and lead because of it, because we don't understand what the people around us actually need and what they want from us, right? How they receive information. So speak to that a little bit from a leadership perspective, and what that communication that you experienced with your wife, how that has helped you as a leading performance coach.
Yeah, one of the things I'd actually recommend, in addition for the listeners of the 5 Love Languages, if you haven't read it, is anything by John and Julie Gottman. Because they are kind of the gurus on relationship. They have a new book. It's actually sitting over here on my shelf called Fight Right. And it's all about managing conflict with your partner. And I got it. Not that we have issues with that. One, I'm always like, how do I improve? But my thought is, how do I handle conflict better with my friends and my coworkers, my team? Because what you're going to pick up in your closest, most personal relationships is going to show up in other areas. So one of the reasons the work I do is like, I want to make you a better person, because if you're a better person, you're going to do better work. You're going to be a better leader. You're going to take more pride in those things. And so evaluating your closest relationships is really helpful in evaluating the relationships of those you're going to influence. So the communication piece we talked about, right? Just because we think we said it didn't mean we actually said it. Second thing is, sometimes, do we want to be right, or do we want to do what's best for the relationship or the team overall? And sometimes as a leader, that's putting our ego aside, right? One of the hardest things is like, we love being right. We love being the leader and getting the praise, but like, how do we make sure the attention goes on them? How do we make sure that we're lifting up our team for the work they're doing versus accepting it all for our ego? And so those are pieces that come into it. And then the last one that I think as leaders we can often overlook is the small things of, in a relationship, continually dating. When you think about the continually date, you're continually pursuing the person. You're buying them flowers, you're taking them to dinner, but you're saying sweet things to them, like what you appreciate about them and what you like about them and what you're grateful for. Like, you're buttering them up, as we laugh, in the dating phase, right? But when we get married, a lot of times we just let it go by the wayside because it's, quote, expected. Now think about the workplace. We expect our high performers to do good work. How often do we praise them for it? How often do we recognize them doing things within their control? Because what it does is set a tone for the rest of the culture. How often do we praise process and not just outcomes of, hey, you got a successful sale, or you brought in a new client, or you did this. It's, hey, I saw you stayed late this week. I appreciate that. I want you to know I've recognized the extra energy you've put in above and beyond stuff. I've become more aware of it just in not only my marriage, but just the work we do, of recognizing that. And even saying, like, I've got one of our team members, she's a contractor. She runs a lot of our social. She's kind of gone above and beyond getting some content for us. And I noticed, like, she seemed a little stressed lately. And she's like, oh, I'm moving and I'm dealing with this with family stuff too. And I was like, well, one, what do you need from us? And she's like, I'm good. I just got to manage it. I was like, okay, cool. And so I went on that night. I looked up her address, kind of where she was. I looked up a sports massage place near her, and I sent her a 2-hour gift certificate. I said, hey, listen, everything's crazy right now. Make sure you schedule time for this in the next 2 weeks on us. And it's like recognizing those things and saying, hey, you're doing really good work. We haven't gotten some of the outcomes we want, but I see you showing up and working hard, so I know we will eventually. How are you taking care of you in this process? And I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't been forced to, and force myself intentionally to pick up more on my spouse and say, where am I praising you? Where am I encouraging you more consistently versus where am I just taking things as is and being like, oh yeah, that's part of what it is.
This is so good. And I love the way that you explain this. I just wrote about this recently within the past couple of days, and really looking for the good. And we see what we want to see, right? If we're looking for goodness, if we're looking for people who go above and beyond, if we're looking for people who show up as their best selves and who are giving as much as they possibly can based on their current skill sets, when we're looking for it, we will absolutely find it. Then, to your point, it's really about recognizing it, acknowledging it, and kind of going back to a marriage for a moment. After years of marriage, we often fall into that place where we take the relationship for granted, right? We didn't used to do that, right? Because we were in the dating mode, right? We were courting, we were doing all the things and the flowers and the cards and the nice things that we would say. And I love the way that you said, we should do that on a regular basis, right? It should continue, and we should carry that over to the relationships we have at work as well. Recognizing, acknowledging, appreciating, and doing something for someone that's meaningful to them. And the fact that you recognize that this individual was in a stressful situation and you took action, right? You did something that was kind. And imagine the impact that has on that person and their life. What a great story. And I'm sure that she's probably told 10 other people about what you did. I love that.
And
that's so
I was about
good.
to say, and it's the thing, like, it's the seeds we plant that we may not see harvest, right? I don't know the friends she told,
exactly.
But I'm not worried about that. I'm just worried about what am I planning.
Absolutely. So the first book that you wrote, Compete Every Day, you share in that book 7 daily choices, right? That the best of the best make to enhance their focus, increase their levels of success, and win at work and life. So without going through all of the 7 choices, I would love it if you would share maybe 2 or 3 and how you were able to come up with those, what the mechanism was, what the process was, and then how you've been able to use that information to impact other people's lives.
Yeah, so that first book has taken me on a journey I was not prepared for, and continually humbled by. So it's really funny when I share a couple of these choices, you're going to think, oh, that's pretty simple, and that's the point. It's simple. It's not easy to execute because simple and easy are not the same thing. And before I tell you what they were, I'll share, I'd had people tell me for years, you should write a book. And in 2019, as I was building this speaking career, I lost out on 4 to 5 opportunities to other speakers who had a book. The event planner said, we love you. We think the content's a perfect fit, but we want to get a book for the audience. And I said, cool, I'll see you next year, right? That competitive side jumps in. So I write this book based on my first corporate talk. And I read through drafts of it and edit it, and I think, this sucks. Like, I don't even like this. And I got an opportunity. I'd put the manuscript down. I was trying to figure out what to do, and I'd gotten an opportunity to speak at the Big Brothers Big Sisters of Dallas, the big conference they had in the summer. And I thought, well, my corporate talk doesn't work because I have boys 8 to 18, and I have big brothers who are 30 to 60. Like, I have to speak to both groups. And thought, if I were to take the core concepts I try to teach and just put them into 7 or 8 catchphrases, like something a kid could pick up, but there's depth to it if you pull that string, what would they be? And so I write out these 6 to 7 ideas and 8, and I said, oh my gosh, that's the book. This is the book. And so I scrapped like 40,000 words. I rewrote the book around these 7 choices because I thought, man, if I could encourage someone just to do these 7 simple choices consistently, over time, it changes their life. And so one of the ideas is outworking your talent. And the idea that it's, Angela Duckworth talks about this in her book, Grit. It goes back to the quote you had at the very beginning. In the success equation, talent counts, but your effort and consistency are twice as important. So the idea of how do I always give my best effort and how do I be consistent is the idea of, I don't care how much more talented you are, I'm going to outwork you. And in the long run, I'm going to win. And we see it time and time again in sports and in business and in sales. Talented people rely on their talent and don't go above and beyond. Less talented people go higher because they're constantly working. And when you marry the two, that's when really magic happens. That's when you get the Michael Jordans, the Patrick, like the best of the guys who, when you think of Tom Brady, not the most physically talented individual, but was a maniac when it came to work. And so I looked at that. The one that I always go back to that I tend to get the most responses on in the book is choose your starting lineup wisely. And you think about basketball, your starting lineup is 5 people. So it's really a play on Jim Rohn's quote, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And Dr. David McClellan, a social psychologist from Harvard, estimates that 95% of our successes and failures in life can be attributed to the people we habitually associate with. So almost all of your success or failure is some way influenced by the people you spend the most time with. And so when I look at those numbers and I talk about the starting lineup, I say, as kids, we just hung out with whoever was on the playground or in our neighborhood. Like we just hung out by social convenience. As we get older, we tend to do the same thing. We only hang out with coworkers or who we might see at the gym or wherever. And we don't intentionally say, who are the people that have the values that are doing the things that I want to do? How do I spend time with other high achievers? How do I spend time with other people in leadership positions? Because what we find is unless we're putting ourselves in rooms with other people who are going to help us grow, challenge us to live up to a standard of excellence, we're going to slip to what our default is, which is convenience. And so the idea of choosing your starting lineup, I go through kind of three people to avoid, which are the people that always say yes, the yes men, as they laugh about in Hollywood and sports, right? The people that only tell you what you want to hear, not because they really like you, but because they want to keep you around. They want to be part of your circle. You've got the people who are envious of your wins, like the people you can tell get a little jealous when you talk about the promotion or the sale. And I'm like, a true friend should stand on tables, slam their feet down, scream like it's a sporting event when you have a great thing happen in your life. And then, you got those, and then the excuse makers, the ones that, I want to do things like, I want to start a business, I want to start a podcast, but I've got all this other stuff. Like they always have excuses. And if you can learn to identify and avoid those people, it's crazy how your life will start to change because of the people immediately around you. It's like if you want to start a new habit, find people who have that habit. It's going to be a whole lot easier to live a healthier lifestyle if you hang out with people that go to 5 a.m. workouts or 6 a.m. workouts rather than it is the people at the 5 or 6 p.m. happy hour. There's nothing wrong with either group, but it's going to be a lot easier to build the healthy lifestyle with the people who are like, hey, I'm in bed relatively early because I'm up at 4 a.m. to go to the gym before work, rather than the people who are like, we had happy hour 3 days a week. Like that's just the deal. So who do you hang out with? Because it influences how you show up.
So good. Give us one more.
Yeah. Love this one. Always do your best. Always do your best. It plays into a little bit of effort, but it's the idea that, Martin Luther King Jr. had a quote around, if you're going to be a street sweeper, be so good at your job that the angels of heaven look down and notice and marvel at your work. Like take so much pride in it. And I shared a story of working at my dad's gas station as like a 7-year-old, and I cut corners cleaning the parking lot because it's just going to get dirty again in 20 minutes. There's always a cigarette butt or a lottery ticket or whatever. And my dad poured into me this fact that if you're ever going to do a job, you always do it to the best of your ability. 1, take pride in what you do, but 2, understand like people are always watching you, and you're either providing them an example of someone to follow or a lesson of something to avoid. Your actions, whether you realize it or not, if you're a parent, you know this, your kids learn 4-letter words from you. They learn all your habits from you, whether you realize it or not. As a leader, your teams are watching the same thing. And whatever you allow your own standards to slip to becomes their acceptable behavior as well. And that's one of the biggest things that I think leaders and business owners can really separate themselves from the masses is by modeling the standard of excellence that they're trying to hold everyone else to.
This is outstanding. So we obviously are going to provide a link to both of your books. We have all of your social handles as well. So for all of you that are listening right now, obviously we can only scratch the surface, right? But there is so much more detail and depth to this first book. So I would encourage all of you to go out and purchase a copy of that. And most importantly, as we had talked about toward the beginning of the conversation, take action on what you read. Take action on what lands well with you. And knowledge is important. Always continue to educate yourself, be a lifelong learner. But if you don't do anything with the information, nothing changes.
That's
so
right.
Let's make sure that we're doing that, right? So I want to also very briefly speak to Lead Better Now, which is your latest book. And what I wanted to focus on here, just very briefly, is developing the right mindset for leadership. So give us maybe a broad brush view of how leaders can work to develop the right mindset for leadership.
Yeah, so this book, I'll give you a quick little tease on it. How my wife walked in on me crying because I couldn't pay a bill. This book starts with her coming into my office in tears and really going through a leadership struggle where she thought she was failing and it was her fault and she wasn't made for leadership. In reality, she hadn't been trained. She'd been thrown into the fire. And now she was having to manage and lead for the first time. And I got to laugh myself, which doesn't always go well, right? And just tell her, what do you think I do for a living? Like, nobody knows what they're doing. We take A-plus performers and we throw them into leadership. And from a mental perspective, it's a huge shift because a performer, it's on you. It's up to you to provide and get results. As a leader, it's on your team. Your success is dependent on other people. And so shifting that mindset is really tough. And this book is more of a very practical guide on how to start. And it always starts with where I believe the foundation is, which is leading yourself. And it's really understanding what an opportunity leadership is, how it's going to be challenging, right? If you expect it to be easy, you're going to be hit in the face with a hard dose of reality. If you expect it to be a challenge, you respond very differently. It's like running a race. If you think a marathon is going to be easy and you don't train for it, about 3 miles in, you're in for a rude awakening. But if you prepare, you know it's going to be hard. Then when it's uncomfortable, you're like, I've trained for this. So it really starts there. Then it's how are you leading yourself effectively? Because if you don't model the behavior, anything else you do becomes worthless. And then the big piece that I feel gets so overlooked by most industries today and a lot of the groups we work with is the connection piece. And once you're leading yourself, how do you actually build relationships? You don't rely on what your title is and where you are in the org chart to demand change. You create relationships and make deposits to cultivate influence that inspires change. And so we teach ways of how can you connect with your people so that they know I'm part of a team, I'm a human, I'm someone you value. And the last piece is on the communication piece. A lot of the things we talked about today of how are you consistently praising process? How are you not just managing, which is task-oriented, but you're coaching, which is people-oriented and development. And that's really your job. You can manage tasks all day long. You may move up throughout the org chart, but if you lead, you're constantly developing people and you become incredibly valuable for any organization, because if there's someone in a team that can develop other people toward their full potential, they'll always have a job.
That is so true. I mean, these are transferable skills that work anywhere and everywhere. So thank you for sharing that. And just very briefly on the culture piece, I know this is another area where you spend a lot of time working with businesses, companies on building successful cultures where people can thrive, where they can retain good talent and attract outstanding talent. So we've heard before the phrase that culture trumps all. Do you agree with that statement?
I do. And the reason being is if you're as a leader committed to a great culture toward developing and retaining top talent, then you've also got a mind to say, how do we get better, which will play into your strategy. You can have the best strategy in the world, but if you have a terrible culture, it's not going to matter because the execution is not going to be there, or it's going to be so limited that people are going to burn out and leave. And what we should strive for as business owners, and I heard this recently. I had a guest on our podcast that talked about it, and he had gotten it from one of the Chick-fil-A executives. And the executive said this, and it really struck me. If you think about it, if you've ever been to a Chick-fil-A, like it's a bunch of high school and college kids that work there. Like they're all there. They all say my pleasure. Like they've got the system down. But what happens? You graduate high school, you're off. You're not there forever. And so she said something along the lines of, we always want to be looked back on, referred to as what a great place to have worked. And I thought, that's a beautiful way to look at your culture. Because what you hope as a business owner is I'm going to invest in you and develop you. And I want you to stay. And if I develop you, if I give you feedback, if I show you appreciation, if there's opportunity to grow, 99% of the time they're going to stay. People typically leave because they're not appreciated, they don't get feedback, or there's a better opportunity elsewhere. That's 99% of the time. 1% family moves. There's all sorts of those kind of uncontrollables. But if you focus on that of like, say this person's with me forever, but even if they're not, if they always look back and say, that was a great place to have worked because this business owner poured into me and invested in me and developed me, and honestly, who I am today is because of them, they become your best recruiter. And there's always more talent coming in who want to be a part of that, because more than anything today, we have more freedoms with technology and work remote and everything else. We can work wherever. So the fight for talent is more fierce than ever. And it's not about donut days and 4-day work weeks a lot of times. It's really about being somewhere that I'm appreciated, that I'm developed, that people care about me and want to see me win. And that truly starts to transform a culture. And when you do that, when you have people that want to be there, that love being there, that are developed, they're going to take ownership in the process, want to do work, want to look for opportunities, which is going to help you grow and outlast anybody who's burning their people out end over end because they just don't want to be a part of that anymore.
This is so powerful. You know, the irony is I was with a business group this morning and we were talking about this very topic around culture. And I would just share with all of you right now that if you're not intentional about creating culture, culture is going to develop anyway. And that's not what you want to have happen. You want to be intentional about it as a leader and develop the right type of culture that ties to your values, your mission, and the type of business that you want to create. And to Jake's point, how great is it to have current employees and then also those that maybe leave your company speak highly about your business and about how that organization and the leadership instilled confidence and help them believe in themselves and help give them a lift up so they can contribute greater things to this world. What an amazing opportunity there to build the right type of culture. So, Jake, a couple quick things as we're wrapping up our conversation here. You know, we know that the better questions we ask of ourselves, the better outcomes we can create. It can truly impact and change our own lives and the lives of those that are around us. So what are one or two bigger questions that you're asking yourself? It can be about life or it could be about business, but bigger questions that you're contemplating on.
Yeah, so the first one is to always look of where I'm falling short. So where am I settling for what's convenient instead of pushing to improve it? Like, where am I catching myself, like, accepting just good enough versus a standard of excellence? And that really forces me to go through everything I'm doing. And sometimes that question is like, you're spending a little too much time in your email or on LinkedIn versus priorities because it's more convenient versus the strategic work. The second question I tend to ask is, where should I be stretching myself? Like, where's there an area that I need to get outside of my comfort zone more? For example, one of the things I'm signed up to do in the next month, I'm running a high rocks race. I did one in November. I signed up like 3 days before the race just to do it with friends. It was a little rough based on not training. And so this one I committed ahead of time, and I'm forcing myself to run, which I do not like running, and train for it. Because I said, man, I need to, see how I compare to last time, but I need to push myself and have a target in the physical sense so I can reap benefits in the other areas. And so that's typically about once a quarter. I try to evaluate as kind of a quarterly review of what are the projects I have for this quarter? Where am I on pace for my annual goals? But where am I settling right now that I need to step it up? And where am I stretching myself? And if I can't identify and answer both of those questions, I've got to spend time doing the work to do it.
Love it. That is so good. My final question to you. What is one of the most difficult decisions that you've had to make in the pursuit of the person who you are today?
Yeah, I would say accepting the fact that you're going to mess up. Like a lot of high performers can probably relate to this. We have a hard time giving ourselves grace. We have a hard time accepting that we fall short. And for me, it was kind of during that 2017-18 period of I'm pivoting the business. I believe this is the right move, but I'm failing right now. And what I found is if I could reframe my identity away from having to be perfect to constantly improving, it changed how I was allowed to have grace. It changes when I mess up during a keynote, because it happens, right? You tell a story, it doesn't quite work there. Things happen during the midst of it. If I expected myself to be the best and perfect and I fall short of that, I'm going to beat myself up. But if I look at myself as a work in progress, well, then all of a sudden that becomes data for learning. And if I say, okay, that's something that did not work this time, what am I going to do differently to improve it next time? I start to give myself more grace, which allows me to show up differently, which allows me to perform better in the future, because I'm not beating myself up for what I wasn't. I'm focused on what am I doing to improve today.
That is beautiful. Well, I will tell you that you added value today. You definitely did not fall short. I appreciate you being here today. Thank you for sharing of your wisdom, of your insights, being candid, telling great stories, and just being you, being authentically you. I'm grateful for you, and thank you for joining us on Business Minds Coffee
Thanks
Chat.
so much, Jay. This was fun.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and for listening. And I do have a quick favor to ask. Would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? Let us know what you thought about this episode. As a matter of fact, do exactly the same thing with Jake's podcast, which we're going to link in the show notes here. I know he would appreciate that as well. That helps our podcast grow and attract incredible guests. And to enjoy more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button, and until next time, keep learning, keep growing. Make sure you pick up a copy of Lead Better Now, apply the lessons you learn, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.